Who could know, back in the early 1970s, that what started in a small brick building in Beaver Creek, Ohio, would emerge as an innovative powerhouse in the technology world. The company evolved to be called Lexis Nexis and would go on to impact the world in powerful ways. From its humble beginnings, this company and its people set the world on a path that led to the information age. Join us for conversations that reveal how this amazing organization evolved and grew.
Hey, all right. If you've been wondering where the heck Keith and I have been for the past month or so, we've been gathering up a whole list of important people to talk to. Keith, welcome back to the Lexis Nexis History Podcast. You always look tan and relaxed. Why is that?
I am tanned, rested, and ready, Terry, for this podcast today, man. I'm outside a lot these days. I don't work at Lexis Nexis anymore.
Well, what are you, golfing all the time?
If you can call it that. Yeah, I do my best. Yeah.
All right.
I'm excited about today's guest, though. This is
all right. So why don't you introduce today's guest? I'm going to bring him in here, and you bring him. You tell us who we got.
All right. Well, there he is. I am very proud and happy that we are joined today by a true legend of Lexis Nexis. My wife used to ask me to describe Mert, and I said, geez, it's like John Wayne. I idolized the guy. Like he knows this. But I made some notes as I knew I was going to talk about Mert in addition to talking with Mert today. A lot of things. Honest as the day is long, smart, tough, clearly a pioneer, as the people who are watching and listening today will learn more. He also happens to be a former boss of mine for some part of my career that I really am thankful for, and so much more. He's done so many things that I'm anxious to get into those things, but I guess I will abbreviate that introduction now because we're going to learn more and more about Mert and his experiences as we go. Mert, welcome to this podcast where we get to talk about the history of Lexis Nexis. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome, Keith. I'm happy to be here. Terry?
Thank you, Mert. Hey, Mert, I heard you had a birthday recently. Is that true?
Yes, at the end of May. Yeah.
Well, happy birthday. Yeah. Belated happy birthday.
As we're recording, Mert's birthday's in the past, but hey,
I'm a little old. I'm a little older than both of our presumptive presidential nominees.
Well.
So you're qualified to run.
Well, I hope that I don't miss a beat so as much as either one of them regularly does. So,
well, Keith, this is up your alley. If we had an alley to talk about, it's where Mert's life kind of lived at Lexis Nexis. So I'm going to kind of let you lead this, and I'll jump in with sarcastic comments from time to time.
All right. Well, we look forward to that. Mert, we're going to go through some things, and some of it will be in order. But I want to start with something that's certainly not in the order of your career, although it was early. But before I get to my initial question, let me verify one thing. The actual date that you started at Lexis Nexis, which was then called Mead Data Central, was when?
September 17th, 1973.
Fantastic. Yeah. And just for the record, what was your badge number?
67.
67.
There we go. Everybody at Lexis Nexis is envious of a 2-digit badge number. We all know that reference for the most part when people joined the business. So much respect for that. So here's what I wanted to get at first. I'm always conscious on podcasts that people jump in, jump out, and I wanted to get to my favorite story that I've heard you tell. And I think you know what I'm talking about, or you'll remember shortly. My favorite story that you tell, and it's for those that I don't want them to jump out before they hear this. Specifically, there was a very important sale made in the early days of Lexis Nexis, and that sale was made to the United States Supreme Court. Oh. And this handsome gentleman between Terry and I was at the center of achieving that sale. And Mert, can I ask you to go ahead and take your time and give us the colorful details of selling Lexis Nexis to the Supreme Court at a really important early time in our history?
Yeah, well, it was 1975. I had been working with the Federal Judicial Center, which at that time was across Lafayette Park on the northeast corner of it, across from the White House. And the Federal Judicial Center is really a research and development arm of the federal courts, but it also does educational programs for new federal district judges. So, and I had been working with one of the folks there who was interested in this new thing called Lexis. And of course, at that time, it was only Lexis. And our spiel was always, Lexis is a online, interactive legal research, computer-assisted legal research service. And you had, in order to introduce it properly, you had to give that spiel each time. Anyway, at the FJC, there was a young man named Alan Sager who was interested in getting Lexis introduced into some of the federal courts on an experimental basis. And a lead up to that, it was determined by the director of FJC, Joe Ebersole, and Joe actually ultimately worked for Lexis Nexis, but that's a different story. In any event, Joe thought it would be worthwhile if we could invite the Chief Justice into the FJC to actually see Lexis in operation. And it took a couple of months to get this arranged, but it was, of course, at that time, it was Chief Justice Warren Burger. And so back in those days, the technology that you were dependent upon was really crazy. For some reason, over at the FJC, in order to establish a link, we actually had to set up the terminal in a broom closet. It was unbelievable.
I bet you're looking for an analog line or something.
Yeah. And Bob Brinton, who was one of our lawyers from the New York office, was there, being a lawyer, to welcome the Chief Justice and his retinue. And we got everything all set up, including the printer, all this good stuff. And we keep looking at our watches, and the Chief Justice hasn't appeared. And, it's like, oh man, we've gone through all this. And, probably over an hour after the appointed time, the chief comes in. We start going through the exercise, demonstrating. He asked us to put in a search request. We do that. Up it comes. I hit the button to print it. In those days, it was the old thermal Texas Instruments thermal printer.
Right.
And it starts coming out, and it comes out with these canned characters. I mean, it was like garbled stuff all over and the chief leans over and says, "Oh, I see you've got phonetic printing."
We're an alpha test on that, right?
Yeah. So anyway, we go through, and he was duly impressed in the way he went. The next thing I know is I get an invitation for us to go up to the Supreme Court and to give a demonstration to several of the justices who were there. They weren't all there. But there was Whizzer White and Thurgood Marshall. I mean, these are great names, in our history. And Jim Clippinger had come out from, because this was obviously a very high stakes kind of demonstration. We wanted to make sure there was no glitches that we couldn't overcome. And we had it set up in one of the ante rooms, a very large space in the Supreme Court, and got it. And fortunately, it was the phone line was a little bit closer than it had been over at the Judicial Center, so we didn't have to be in a broom closet. But anyway, we got it set up, and there was probably four or five of the justices who were there, and at that time we had begun to create a method to be able to enable the viewers to actually see what was going on the screen, rather than coming up and gathering over top of the monitor. And so we ganged some monitors off of the computer so that they could see the interaction on the screen. And so that was great. And then that went well. And then probably another month later, we got an invitation to do the demonstration to the entire court.
Wow.
Supreme Court.
All 9 justices, right?
At all 9 justices, including the chief, of course, and at a luncheon in the Supreme Court, dining room. And Bob Brinton again was with me on this one, and he's a story I'll say before we complete this is, in the earliest days of Lexis, we marketing reps, none of whom was a lawyer, before we could give a demonstration to any lawyers, we had to have a staff attorney along with us. And, it really sort of constrained how much selling we could do, because we always had to have a lawyer along to do it. Of course, the marketing reps who, inventive as we were, we started scheduling so many demos that we didn't have enough lawyers to come to it with all.
Good strategy.
Yeah. Anyway, we did this demonstration at the luncheon for the entire court, and about 10 days later, I got a call, from Mark Cannon, who was the administrative officer he actually was a civilian who did all the work for managing the operations of the court. And so he said, if you can bring up a subscription agreement, we'd like to go ahead and subscribe. And so we did. It was actually Ed Hudon was then the Supreme Court librarian, and he actually had the completed subscription agreement, and I went up and got it. So that was basically it. Along the same period of time, Alan Sager had gotten agreement with Joe Ebersole, the director of FJC, to go ahead and have several courts around the country install a Lexis terminal. And so, that was the beginning.
Just real quick, were we allowed to tell people the Supreme Court just signed an agreement with us? Were we allowed to use it as a marketing tool?
Well, sure. We you understand that at that time, we tend to think of Lexis as a unique, but there was nothing like it. Well, it turns out that, my being in Washington, D.C., I had a competitor at the Justice Department with a system called Juris. I had which was an attempt to mimic the online service that Lexis was. And then also there was it was called LITE, LITE, acronym for Legal Information Through Electronics. And it was a batch kind of system. And ultimately it was renamed to FLIGHT, Federal Legal Information Through Electronics. And it was all offline. It was just like batch processing back. Anyone who may remember back in the dark ages of computing, where you actually had to you did your program and punched out your punch cards and put it into the queue, and some number of hours later you'd get the answer. So certainly not interactive in the way that Lexis was. People tend to forget how. I mean, we all forget. I forget. Technology advances zoom past us.
Oh yeah.
And we just incorporate them into our daily, lives and work and whatever. And so you don't think about the fact that there was never an internet, or there was never a thing called an iPhone or a cell phone, or this stuff just whizzes by. On September 17th of this year, it will be 51 years ago that I joined MDC.
Wow.
And what was the time frame again, Mert, for when you were at the court and made that sale?
Oh, that was 1975. So it was probably, I want to say 15 to 18 months after I joined.